good day, and welcome to the Narrow Gate. Thank you for squeezing in here. Fasten your seatbelts, because today we are talking about a very controversial topic. I've never done a video on one of those before. Today we are talking about the topic of modesty. Particularly, what we're talking about is what is talked about in 1 Timothy 2, that is 9 through about 10. I also want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves, not with elaborate hairstyles or gold, pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds. Appropriate for women who profess to worship God. I think something that is important to bring up is that when modesty is talked about in these verses, as you can see, it's not actually talking about wearing revealing clothing. On the contrary, it's talking about excessive jewelry and such. Now, the second thing I want to bring up is I want to ask that when we read this verse, are we actually getting the message that we should be getting from this verse? Or are we using it to simply say that the fashion of Christians should look just how I want it to, and follow an outdated standard of modesty? Now, I've had a lot of biblical conversations with other guys. I'm sure that comes as no surprise, seeing as I am a guy, and I'm someone who likes to have biblical conversations. But something that always bothers me is when I'm talking with these guys and the conversation of modesty comes up, it's always brought up this verse. And it's always the guy saying, oh yes, women should be more modest. But I think that isn't the message we, men in particular, should get from this verse. So what is talked about in this verse is how women shouldn't be adorning themselves with this sort of immodesty, with fancy jewelry and that sort of stuff, but instead they should be adorning themselves with the beauty of good works and the things that are pleasing to God, not just to the eye. I think as men, we can look at that and we can say, this is what I should be attracted to. I shouldn't be chasing after simply this sort of beauty that simply comes from the way a woman dresses, or perhaps how much makeup she's wearing, and that sort of thing. Instead, what I should be chasing after is a woman who adorns herself with the good deeds that are described here. As for the conversation of modesty, I think there is room for that conversation. However, I don't think that a bunch of guys sitting around talking about how women should dress is really the way that conversation happens. I think that conversation should happen among women when it comes to all of these sorts of topics in the Bible. Instead of looking at how does this verse apply to me, I think sometimes we tend to look at, oh, this is a good verse that so-and-so needs to hear and needs to be following, and I don't think that that is a good way to go about this. I don't think that men need to be wagging their fingers at women saying, "You are not dressed modestly enough." Again, I think that conversation should happen, but I don't think that it often happens in the right way. Now, of course, you don't want to cause your brother to sin. You don't want to purposefully dress in a sexual way. But I think as men, we need to take up our responsibility in not lusting after women. I think it's easy to pass the blame, but in reality, it's much more our part. I find this idea that if women dress at all indecently, us as men cannot take any blame. I think that's really silly. Now, let's take a moment to address this idea that you dress modestly because you hate your body. I think it's actually not that. On quite the contrary, you should dress less revealingly because you love your body. Your body is a sacred place, which is why you cover your body. You don't dress revealingly, not because you hate your body, but because you love your body. So much to the point where you consider your body to be a sacred place. We're talking about God's most treasured creation here. And although the body isn't as valuable to God, I think, as the soul, I still think that the body was made good. And it was made to be taken care of and not just given to anyone. Much like how not just anyone was allowed inside the Holy of Holies, your body should be treated with the same respect, I believe. And that sacred place is lovely enough to keep concealed and to take good care of. Now, there's two things I want to make very clear. Thing number one, I do think that wearing revealing clothing is a form of dressing immodestly. And there is room to have a conversation about that. Two, I don't think that men should necessarily be discluded from this conversation. But I do think that when men are talking to men, instead of saying how women should take that verse, they should be saying what they can learn from that verse. Those are the two things I want to make very clear in this video. And I hope you understand that. But just overall, the point is that dressing revealingly isn't the only way a woman can dress immodestly. Even though that is the modern interpretation of the word, that's clearly not entirely what this verse is talking about. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. And I hope that you liked it if you liked it. That is, you push the button that tells me that you liked it. I hope you did that. That sounded a little more passive-aggressive than I meant it to. Now, the overall takeaway from this video is that we shouldn't just use verses as what people say they say, or as what we want them to say, like how people take that verse and use it to say that women shouldn't dress overly revealing, when in reality it's talking about wearing too much clothes instead of not enough. Instead, we should look at what the verses are actually saying in context. If you want to see another video about taking verses out of context, there's my video right there about how you shouldn't base stuff off of just reading one verse. But, without further ado, don't forget